A ruthless mafia don agrees to marry a complete stranger, but the woman whispers his real name before the ceremony even begins. Dominic Moretti was the kind of man people feared before they ever met him. His name carried weight in every corner of Chicago. Judges delayed cases when they heard he was involved. Businessmen changed contracts overnight if one of Dominic's men called them. Rival families avoided speaking his name in public. At 38 years old, Dominic Moretti controlled one of the most powerful criminal empires in the country. He owned hotels, casinos, shipping companies, restaurants, construction firms, and private security businesses spread across multiple states. To the outside world, he looked like a wealthy businessman in expensive suits with a perfect public image. But everyone who truly knew him understood the truth. Dominic Moretti was dangerous. He had spent his entire life building power through fear. He trusted nobody, forgave nothing, and believed emotions were weaknesses that only got people killed. People who betrayed Dominic disappeared. People who lied to him suffered. And people who stood in his way usually did not survive long enough to regret it. That was why the idea of marriage seemed impossible. Dominic had never wanted a wife. He had never wanted children. He had never believed in love. For years, he avoided relationships because he knew they could be used against him. Every enemy wanted leverage. Every rival family looked for weaknesses. Dominic refused to give them one. But power came with obligations. And after the death of his father, the pressure around him grew worse. Several powerful families in New York, Chicago, and Las Vegas had started questioning Dominic's future. He had no wife, no children, no clear heir. That made him look vulnerable. The older men in the organization began pushing him toward marriage, not because they cared about his happiness, because they cared about control. A wife in the right family could strengthen alliances. A marriage could stop wars before they started. It could tie powerful bloodlines together and protect Dominic's empire from enemies waiting for signs of weakness. Dominic hated the idea, but for the first time in years, he found himself trapped. 3 major families threatened to pull their support from him unless he agreed to marry. The decision had already been made before he entered the room. Her name was Elena Cross. Almost nobody knew where she came from. The official story was simple. She was the daughter of a wealthy businessman from Boston who had connections to several political families. Her father had recently died, leaving her alone with a large inheritance and several powerful people interested in controlling it. Marriage to Dominic would protect her. At least that was what everyone claimed. But the truth was stranger. Very few people had actually met Elena Cross. There were no interviews, no public appearances, no real history, no social media, no close friends, no old relationships. It was as if she had appeared out of nowhere. That alone made Dominic suspicious. He ordered his men to investigate her. Days passed, then weeks, but every report came back the same. Clean, too clean. There was almost nothing in Elena's background except expensive schools, private tutors, and a short list of old addresses. It did not make sense. Nobody reached adulthood without leaving behind a trail. Dominic immediately assumed she was hiding something. The wedding took place less than a month later inside a private church on the edge of the city. Only a small number of people were invited. Dominic wanted no reporters, no photographers, and no unnecessary attention. The church itself was old and beautiful, filled with white flowers, polished wooden floors, and tall windows that let sunlight pour into the room. Everything looked elegant, but the atmosphere felt cold. Armed men stood near every entrance. Expensive black cars lined the street outside. Every guest inside the church looked nervous. Nobody smiled around Dominic Moretti. Dominic stood near the altar wearing a tailored black suit with a dark gray tie. He looked calm on the outside, but his expression remained unreadable. He did not care about the flowers. He did not care about the ceremony. To him, this marriage was just another business arrangement, nothing more. Then Elena entered the church. For the first time that day, Dominic looked surprised. She wore a long white dress with lace sleeves and a high neckline. The dress was elegant, modest, and simple enough to look expensive without trying too hard. Her dark brown hair rested over one shoulder in soft waves. Her face was calm, beautiful, controlled. But what caught Dominic's attention was not her appearance. It was the way she walked. She moved slowly, confidently, without fear. Most people became nervous around Dominic. Most people looked down when he stared at them. Elena didn't either. She walked toward him as if she had known him her entire life. That unsettled him more than he expected. As she reached the altar, Dominic studied her face carefully. She looked younger than he imagined, maybe 28 or 29. Her green eyes were sharp, observant, and strangely familiar, but he could not understand why. The priest began speaking. Dominic barely listened. His attention stayed on Elena. She stood beside him without shaking, without hesitation, without even pretending to be nervous. That was when he noticed something else. She was not looking at him the way other women did. There was no admiration in her eyes, no fear, no attraction, only recognition, as if she already knew exactly who he was beneath the expensive suit and dangerous reputation. That feeling stayed with Dominic through the entire ceremony. The guests remained silent. The church remained still. Outside, rain clouds slowly gathered above the city. Then, just before the priest asked them to exchange vows, Elena turned slightly toward Dominic. She leaned closer. For one brief second, her lips moved near his ear, and she whispered a single name, Gabriel. Dominic stopped breathing. Nobody had called him Gabriel in over 25 years. The name hit him harder than a gunshot, because Gabriel was not Dominic Moretti. Gabriel was a frightened little boy he used to be before his entire family died. Gabriel was a child who disappeared the night blood covered the floors of his old house. Gabriel was a name he buried long ago. Only a handful of people still knew it. Most of them were dead. Dominic slowly turned toward Elena. For the first time in years, there was real emotion on his face. Shock. Elena looked at him calmly. There was no smile, no satisfaction, just silence. Dominic searched her face, trying to understand what was happening. How could she know that name? Who told her? Why would she say it here? For the rest of the ceremony, Dominic barely heard anything around him. The priest's voice sounded distant. The guests looked blurry. Even the wedding ring felt heavy in his hand. All he could think about was Gabriel, a name he spent his entire life trying to forget. After the ceremony ended, the guests moved toward the reception hall, connected to the church. Dominic remained near the altar for several seconds, watching Elena as she walked away. She looked calm, too calm, as if whispering his real name had meant nothing, as if she had expected his reaction. That only made it worse. Dominic immediately ordered 2 of his men to dig deeper into Elena's past. He wanted every address she ever lived at, every school, every phone number, every person she had ever met. He wanted the truth, because no stranger should have known that name, not unless they came from his past. The reception hall filled with expensive music, polished silver, and wealthy guests pretending to celebrate. But Dominic had no interest in any of it. He barely touched his drink. He barely spoke. His eyes stayed fixed on Elena from across the room. She sat quietly at the far end of the table, speaking politely to guests, smiling when necessary, and behaving exactly like the perfect new wife everyone expected her to be. But Dominic knew better. There was something dangerous hidden beneath that calm face. Several times, he noticed her glancing toward him, not with affection, not with fear, with purpose, as if she came here for something far bigger than marriage. Late that evening, after most of the guests had left, Dominic finally found himself alone with her, inside one of the private rooms connected to the reception hall. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The room was quiet except for the sound of Dominic removing his jacket. Elena stood near the fireplace, still wearing her wedding dress. Neither of them spoke at first. The silence between them felt heavy. Dominic slowly stepped closer. He looked directly into her eyes. For the first time that day, Elena's calm expression almost cracked. Almost. Dominic did not ask how she knew his real name. He already knew she would lie. Instead, he looked at her with the same cold expression that had terrified powerful men for years. Because this marriage was no longer about alliances. It was no longer about business. Now it was personal. Because somehow, impossibly, the woman he had married knew something about his past that should have died with the people who took it from him. The name Elena Whisper belonged to a boy Dominic buried years ago along with his family. Dominic did not sleep that night. Long after the wedding guests left and the lights inside the mansion grew dim, he remained alone in his office, staring out at the city below. Rain rolled slowly across the windows. His untouched glass of whiskey sat on the desk beside him, but Dominic barely noticed any of it. All he could hear was that name, Gabriel. Nobody had spoken it in decades, not since the night his old life ended. Dominic Moretti had not been born Dominic Moretti. Years ago, before the power, before the money, before the fear, he had been Gabriel Vale, a frightened little boy with dark hair, bruised knuckles, and a family that never had a chance. Dominic had spent years trying to erase Gabriel from his memory, because remembering meant remembering the blood, the screams, the bodies, the night his entire world disappeared. He was only 10 years old when it happened. Back then, the Vale family lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Philadelphia. They were not rich. They were not powerful. At least that was what Gabriel believed. His father owned a small trucking business. His mother stayed home. His older brother played baseball and dreamed about joining the military someday. To the outside world, they looked normal, but Gabriel's father had secrets. He worked for powerful men connected to organized crime. He moved money, transported illegal shipments, and kept records that could destroy dangerous people if they ever became public. For years, he stayed loyal. Then, he made one mistake. He tried to leave. Nobody left that world alive. One winter night, Gabriel woke up to the sound of shouting downstairs. At first, he thought he was dreaming. Then he heard glass breaking. Then a gunshot. By the time he reached the top of the stairs, the house was already covered in blood. His mother lay near the kitchen. His brother was motionless beside the front door. And his father... Dominic never allowed himself to think about his father for too long. Even now, all these years later, that memory still felt too painful. He only remembered hiding beneath his bed while men moved through the house searching for him. He remembered hearing heavy footsteps in the hallway. He remembered one man saying that there was still a boy missing. And he remembered the face of the man who saved him, Victor Moretti. Victor had been one of the few men his father trusted. He arrived too late to save the rest of the family, but not too late to find Gabriel hiding upstairs. That night, Victor took the boy away, gave him a new name, and raised him as his own son. Gabriel Vale became Dominic Moretti. The old name disappeared. The old life disappeared. Even the old house was burned down weeks later. Victor told Dominic that forgetting was the only way to survive. So Dominic forgot, or at least he pretended to. Only a handful of people ever knew the truth. Victor Moretti, a retired family doctor who changed Dominic's records. 2 old bodyguards who died years ago. And Dominic himself. That was why Elena terrified him. Because there was no logical explanation for how she knew that name. By sunrise, Dominic had already ordered a second investigation into Elena's background. He wanted deeper searches. Private records. Hidden files. Birth certificates, school records, anything. He did not care how much money it cost. He wanted answers. But by midday, the reports came back exactly the same. Nothing. No criminal history. No missing relatives. No connections to the Vale family. No links to Philadelphia. It was as if Elena Cross truly appeared out of nowhere. Dominic hated mysteries, especially when they involved his past. The Moretti mansion sat high above the city on a private stretch of land surrounded by gates, cameras, and armed guards. It was large enough to feel like a hotel and cold enough to feel like a prison. Most people found it intimidating. Elena did not. She moved through the house as if she belonged there. That unsettled Dominic more than anything else. She never asked for permission before entering rooms. She never looked impressed by the expensive artwork, marble floors, or private security standing outside every hallway. She simply observed everything. Quietly, carefully. The staff noticed it too. Several maids whispered about how strange she was. Some of Dominic's men thought she was arrogant. Others thought she was fearless. But Dominic knew better. Elena was hiding something. He watched her constantly over the next few days. At breakfast, she remained calm. At dinner, She barely spoke. She spent hours walking to the mansion gardens alone or reading books in the library as if she had lived there for years. She never acted like a frightened bride trapped inside a dangerous marriage. She acted like someone waiting for the right moment. That made Dominic uneasy. One afternoon, he found her standing in front of an old painting in the hallway outside his office. The painting showed Victor Moretti standing beside several men outside an old house many years earlier. Elena stared at it for several seconds. Then she moved on, but Dominic noticed a look in her eyes. Recognition. That same night, Dominic called in one of the few people he still trusted, his longtime advisor, Marcus Hale. Marcus had been beside Dominic since he was a teenager. He knew more about Dominic's past than most people. If anyone could explain Elena, it would be him. Marcus listened quietly as Dominic explained what happened at the wedding. The moment Dominic mentioned the name Gabriel, Marcus looked genuinely shocked, because Marcus knew how impossible that was. He reminded Dominic that nobody outside the family should know about his original identity. Victor Moretti kept those records buried for decades. Marcus suggested that Elena might be connected to someone from Dominic's childhood, an old enemy, an old witness, someone who survived. That possibility stayed in Dominic's mind long after Marcus left, because for the first time in years, Dominic realized there might still be pieces of his old life hidden somewhere in the world. And Elena might be one of them. Late one evening, Dominic returned to the mansion after a business meeting downtown. The house was quiet. Most of the staff had already gone to bed. As he walked through the upstairs hallway, he noticed Elena's bedroom door was slightly open. A small light still glowed inside. Dominic stopped. He had no reason to enter, but something pulled him closer. Maybe curiosity, maybe suspicion, maybe fear. He stepped inside quietly. The room looked neat and untouched. A suitcase sat near the bed. Several books rested on the nightstand. A silver hairbrush lay near the mirror. Nothing unusual. Then Dominic noticed something sticking out from the corner of one of Elena's bags. A photograph. He picked it up slowly. The second he looked at it, the room seemed to disappear around him. The photograph was old and slightly damaged around the edges. It showed two children standing outside a house. One was a young girl with dark hair. The other was a little boy. The boy looked thin, frightened, and familiar. Dominic stared at the photograph in shock, because the little boy in the picture was him, Gabriel Vale, and standing beside him was Elena. Elena did not marry Dominic for money or power. She married him for revenge. Dominic stood alone in Elena's bedroom, staring down at the old photograph in his hand. The little boy in the picture was unmistakably him. Thin face, dark eyes, torn jacket, Gabriel Vale, and beside him stood a little girl with long dark hair and a serious expression. Elena. For several seconds, Dominic could not move. The photograph looked like it had been taken at least 20 years earlier. The edges were faded, and there was a date written in the corner, the year before his family died. Dominic turned the picture over. There was no writing on the back, no explanation, nothing. That only made it worse, because now he knew one thing for certain. Elena had not entered his life by accident. She knew exactly who he was before the wedding ever happened, and she had hidden the truth. Dominic slipped the photograph into a jacket pocket just before he heard footsteps outside the room. Elena appeared in the doorway a second later. For the first time since their marriage began, she looked surprised. Her eyes moved immediately toward the open suitcase beside the bed. Then they moved to Dominic. The silence between them felt dangerous. Dominic said nothing. He simply looked at her. Then he held up the photograph. Elena's expression changed instantly. Not panic, not fear, something closer to sadness. Dominic wanted answers. He wanted the truth. But instead of speaking, Elena quietly walked into the room and closed the door behind her. Then she looked directly at him. And for the first time, Dominic saw cracks in the perfect calm she always carried. Because Elena had spent years preparing for this moment. Years preparing to stand in front of Dominic Moretti and tell him who she really was. Long before she became Elena Cross, she had another name, Elena Hart. She grew up in the same neighborhood where Gabriel Vale once lived. Their families knew each other. Not well, but enough. Her father worked with Gabriel's father. Their mothers sometimes sat together on front porches during the summer. Elena and Gabriel played together when they were children. They were never best friends, but they remembered each other. At least Elena remembered him, because even back then, Gabriel Vale had always looked lonely. He was quiet, serious, and too mature for his age. He never laughed like other boys. He always looked like he was waiting for something bad to happen. Elena never forgot that look. Then one winter night, Gabriel disappeared. The Vale house burned down. The newspapers called it a robbery gone wrong. Nobody in the neighborhood ever learned the truth. Gabriel vanished, and eventually people stopped talking about him. But Elena never forgot him, because only a few months after the Vale murders, violence came for her family too. Her father had worked for dangerous men. He handled money, records, and deliveries tied to organized crime, just like Gabriel's father. And just like Gabriel's father, Elena's father made the mistake of trying to leave. One night, men came to their house. Elena was only 9 years old. She remembered hiding beneath the kitchen table while her mother screamed upstairs. She remembered hearing glass break. She remembered her father begging someone for more time. Then she remembered silence. When police finally arrived, her parents were dead. The house was destroyed. And Elena was alone. She spent the next several years moving through foster homes, group homes, and temporary apartments. Nobody wanted her for long. Nobody explained what really happened to her family. But Elena never stopped asking questions. As she grew older, she started noticing patterns. The same names appeared again and again in old newspaper articles. The same businessmen, the same politicians, the same families. Eventually, one name started appearing more than any other: Moretti. At first, Elena thought Dominic was responsible. He had the money, the power, and the reputation. People feared him. Rumors followed him everywhere. The more she learned about him, the more convinced she became that he was connected to the death of her parents. So she spent years getting closer. She changed her last name from Hart to Cross. She built a new identity. She went to private schools under fake records, worked with private investigators, and learned everything she could about the Moretti family. Every answer led back to Dominic, or so she thought. Then she found something unexpected. Years ago, while searching through old records connected to her father, Elena discovered the name Gabriel Vale. At first, it meant nothing to her. Then she found an old school photograph. The same little boy from her childhood. Gabriel had survived, and somehow he had become Dominic Moretti. That discovery changed everything, because Dominic was no longer just a suspect. He was someone who lost everything too. Someone who may have been hiding from the same people Elena spent years trying to find. That was why she agreed to the marriage. Not for money, not for power. She married Dominic because she believed he held the answers. Back in the bedroom, Dominic listened in silence as Elena finally told him pieces of the truth. Not everything, just enough. She admitted that she knew him as Gabriel. She admitted that she spent years looking for him, but she never told him why, because part of her still did not trust him. And Dominic did not trust her either. That was the problem. They were both standing in the same room, carrying years of secrets, pain, and suspicion. Dominic looked at Elena and realized something that unsettled him even more than the photograph. He believed her, not completely, but enough, because the sadness in her eyes looked real. The pain looked real. And for the first time in years, Dominic found himself looking at someone who understood what it meant to survive. That should have made things easier. Instead, it made everything more complicated. Over the next few days, the tension inside the mansion changed. Dominic stopped treating Elena like a stranger, but he did not treat her like a wife either. They existed in a strange space between suspicion and understanding. Some mornings, they sat across from each other in silence at breakfast. Some nights, they crossed paths in the library or the hallway and held eye contact for a second too long. Dominic still watched her carefully, but now there was something else mixed into his suspicion. Attraction. He hated it, because Dominic Moretti did not trust emotions, and Elena Cross made him feel too many of them. One rainy afternoon, Elena stood near the library window, reading an old book while Dominic worked nearby. Without realizing it, he found himself watching her, the way she tucked loose strands of hair behind her ear, the way she stared out at the rain when she thought nobody noticed, the way sadness seemed to follow her even in silence. For years, Dominic had only seen women as distractions. Elena was different. She felt dangerous in a way he could not explain, because she made him remember the man he used to be before the violence, before the power, before he became Dominic Moretti. That frightened him more than any enemy ever had. Later that evening, Elena returned to her room and found something waiting on the bed, an old silver bracelet. Her breathing stopped instantly. She knew that bracelet. It belonged to her mother. She had not seen it since the night her parents died. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. There was no note beside it, no explanation, just the bracelet. Elena immediately looked toward the doorway. Someone had been inside her room, someone who knew exactly who she was. And deep down, Elena knew one terrifying truth. If someone inside the Moretti family had her mother's bracelet, then someone inside that mansion knew her real name was never Elena Cross. Elena discovers a hidden room inside Dominic's mansion, filled with evidence about her family's death. The silver bracelet remained in Elena's hand long after she found it on the bed. Her mother's initials were still engraved inside the metal. L.H. Laura Hart. Elena stared at it in silence, unable to understand how it ended up inside her room. She had not seen that bracelet since the night her parents died. For years, she believed it was lost forever. Now it was sitting on her bed inside Dominic Moretti's mansion, which meant someone inside the house knew exactly who she really was. That thought followed Elena through the next several days. She stopped sleeping properly. She started paying closer attention to the staff, the guards, and the people moving through the hallways. Every face looked suspicious. Every quiet conversation felt dangerous. The mansion no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a trap. Dominic noticed a change in her immediately. She became more distant, more distracted, more guarded. At dinner, she barely touched her food. In the mornings, she disappeared for hours without explanation. Dominic wanted to ask what was wrong, but pride stopped him, because no matter how much he found himself drawn to Elena, he still did not trust her. And Elena still did not trust him. That was what made everything so dangerous. One afternoon, while Dominic was away handling business downtown, Elena decided to search the mansion. She told herself she was only looking for answers. But deep down, she already knew what she wanted to find. Proof. Proof that Dominic knew more than he admitted. Proof that the Moretti family had something to do with her parents' deaths. The mansion was large enough to hide secrets. Endless hallways, locked offices, private wings that staff rarely entered. Elena moved carefully through the house, paying attention to every room she passed. Most of them looked ordinary. Expensive guest rooms, libraries, private offices, storage rooms. But near the far end of the west wing, she noticed something strange. Behind an old bookshelf inside a small study, there was a hidden door. It was almost invisible unless someone knew where to look. Elena only noticed it because one side of the bookshelf had small scratch marks near the floor. Someone opened it often. Her heart started beating faster. She looked down the hallway. Nobody was there. Slowly, she pushed against the side of the shelf. The hidden door opened. Behind it was a narrow staircase leading downward. The air felt colder inside. Elena hesitated for a moment. Then she stepped inside. At the bottom of the stairs was a small room with no windows. The walls were lined with shelves filled with old files, photographs, newspapers, and boxes. A large desk sat in the center of the room. Everything inside looked old, forgotten, hidden. Elena moved slowly through the room, picking up photographs one by one. Many of them showed people she did not recognize. Old business partners, police officers, politicians, mafia families. Then she saw something that made her stop. A photograph of her father. Elena's hand started shaking. The picture showed him standing beside several men outside a warehouse. One of those men was Victor Moretti, Dominic's father. For a second, Elena could barely breathe, because this was the first real proof she had ever found. Her father knew the Morettis, not casually, not from a distance. They worked together. Elena quickly searched through more files. There were old financial records connected to her father's trucking company, shipping manifests, phone records, notes written in Victor Moretti's handwriting. The deeper she searched, the worse it became, because her father's name appeared everywhere. Then she found a black folder hidden beneath several old newspapers. Inside were crime scene photographs from the night her parents died. Elena felt sick. She had never seen those pictures before. Her house, the broken windows, the blood on the kitchen floor. She almost dropped the folder, but then she noticed something else. One page near the back contained a list of names. Most of them were crossed out, but one remained circled in red ink. Frank Delaney. Elena did not recognize the name. Still, something about it felt important. She turned another page. This time, she found a shorthand-written note attached to one of the files. The note was old and faded, written in Victor Moretti's handwriting. It said only 6 words. Delaney handled both family jobs. Elena read the sentence 3 times. Both family jobs. Her family. Gabriel's family. The room suddenly felt too small. For years, Elena believed Dominic was connected to her parents' deaths. But now another possibility appeared. Maybe Dominic was not the villain. Maybe Dominic had been another victim. Elena sat down slowly in the chair near the desk. Her hands would not stop shaking. Because if Victor Moretti knew what happened to both families, then Dominic's father may have spent years hiding the truth. And if Frank Delaney handled both jobs, then the same man may have destroyed both of their lives. The sound of footsteps above her made Elena freeze. Heavy footsteps. Getting closer. She quickly shoved the files back into the drawer, but it was too late. The hidden door opened. Dominic stood at the top of the stairs. For one terrible second, neither of them moved. Then Dominic slowly walked into the room. His face was unreadable, but there was anger in his eyes. Elena stood immediately. The tension between them felt sharp enough to cut through the room. Dominic looked around at the open files, the photographs, and the folder spread across the desk. Then his eyes moved to the picture of Elena's father still sitting in her hand. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he asked her what she was doing. Elena wanted to lie, but she was too exhausted, too angry, too confused. So instead, she told him the truth. She told him she found her mother's bracelet. She told him she knew someone inside the mansion recognized her. She told him she wanted answers. Dominic listened in silence. Then he looked around the hidden room. There was pain in his face now, because even he had not known everything hidden there. Victor Moretti had kept secrets from everyone, including him. Dominic stepped closer to the desk and picked up the note about Frank Delaney. His expression changed immediately. Elena noticed it. He knew the name. Frank Delaney had once been one of Victor Moretti's most trusted men. He handled security, transport, and private jobs of family did not want linked back to them. Then one day, he disappeared. Victor claimed Frank was dead, but Dominic had never seen a body. For years, nobody mentioned his name again. Dominic slowly lowered the paper, because now he understood something terrifying. If Frank Delaney handled both murders, then someone lied about his death. And if Frank was still alive, then the man responsible for destroying both of their families had been hiding in the shadows this entire time. Elena looked at Dominic. For the first time since she married him, she saw something she never expected. He looked just as broken as she felt. That made everything worse, because Elena wanted to hate him. She wanted revenge. But now, standing together in that hidden room full of old blood and buried secrets, she realized Dominic might not be the monster she spent years searching for. He might be the only person who understood her pain. Then Dominic looked down at one final file, near the edge of the desk. Inside was a recent photograph. The picture showed an older man entering a building in Boston less than 6 months earlier. The man had gray hair, sharp eyes, and a scar across his neck. On the back of the photograph was a name written in black ink, Frank Delaney, and beneath it were 2 words, still alive. The man who destroyed Elena's family has been standing beside Dominic the entire time. The photograph of Frank Delaney remained on the desk long after Dominic and Elena stopped speaking. Still alive. Those 2 words changed everything. For years, Dominic believed Frank Delaney was dead. Victor Moretti told him that Frank disappeared after a violent job went wrong in New York. He claimed Frank was killed by a rival family and buried somewhere nobody would ever find him. Dominic never questioned it. Back then, he trusted his father completely. Now, standing in the hidden room beneath the mansion, Dominic realized how many lies he had accepted without thinking. Elena watched him carefully. For the first time since the wedding, Dominic looked shaken. Not angry, not cold, just lost. Because Frank Delaney was not some random name from the past. Frank had been one of the men who helped raise Dominic after Victor brought him into the Moretti family. He was always around when Dominic was a child. He taught him how to fight, how to shoot, how to survive. He gave Dominic advice when Victor was too busy running the family. As Dominic got older, Frank became more than a bodyguard. He became family. That was what made the truth so much worse. Because if Frank was involved in both murders, then the man Dominic trusted for most of his life may have been responsible for destroying everything. Dominic took the photograph and slipped it into his pocket. Then he looked at Elena. For the first time, there was no anger between them, only the same painful realization. Both of them had spent years chasing ghosts, and both of them had been manipulated by the same man. Over the next few days, Dominic ordered his men to quietly investigate Frank Delaney. Nobody else inside the organization was told the truth. Dominic trusted very few people now. Not after learning what Victor hid from him. Not after realizing someone inside his own world may have been lying to him for decades. But the more Dominic searched, the stranger things became. There were no recent photographs of Frank outside the one hidden in the secret room. No active bank accounts. No public records. Nothing. It was as if Frank Delaney had spent years hiding in plain sight. Then one of Dominic's men finally discovered something unusual. For the last 10 years, a private security company connected to the Moretti organization had been quietly sending money to a retired advisor living outside Boston. The payments were made through fake business accounts and old shell companies. The retired advisor's name was Arthur Moretti, Dominic's uncle. Arthur had been Victor's younger brother. He stayed away from public business for years and claimed he wanted nothing to do with the family after Victor died. But Dominic still trusted him. Arthur visited the mansion several times each year. He attended family dinners. He gave Dominic advice during business conflicts. He always acted calm, wise, and loyal. Dominic never suspected him. Until now, because the security company sending money to Arthur was once controlled by Frank Delaney. Dominic immediately understood what it meant. Frank was never working alone. Someone inside the family protected him. Someone powerful. Someone close. That night, Dominic sat alone in his office, staring at old photographs of Victor and Arthur together. For years, he believed Victor was the only father figure he ever had. But now he wondered how much Victor truly knew. Did Victor order murders? Did Arthur help cover them up? Or was Frank acting alone? The questions would not stop. Across the mansion, Elena was asking herself the same thing. She sat in the library with old files spread across the table, trying to connect names, dates, and records. The deeper she looked, the more one thing became clear. Her father had not been killed because of money. He had been killed because he knew too much. Years earlier, Elena's father discovered that Frank Delaney and Arthur Moretti were secretly stealing money from several mafia operations. They created fake businesses, moved money into hidden accounts, and blamed the missing funds on rival families. Gabriel's father discovered it first. That was why he died. Elena's father learned the truth later. That was why he died too. Both men tried to leave. Both men threatened to expose what they knew. And Frank made sure neither of them survived long enough to speak. The realization made Elena feel sick. Her entire life had been shaped by greed, betrayal, and lies. She spent years blaming Dominic for something he may have never known about. At the same time, Dominic entered the library. He looked exhausted. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Dominic quietly placed a folder on the table in front of her. Inside were bank records, private messages, and proof that Arthur had been secretly connected to Frank for years. Elena looked up at him. Dominic admitted something he never thought he would say out loud. He said he was wrong. He said he trusted the wrong people. He said he should have seen the truth sooner. Elena stared at him. For years, she imagined Dominic as a monster. Now she saw something else. A man who had spent his entire life being controlled by people he trusted. That should have made her feel satisfied. Instead, it made her heart ache. Because somewhere along the way, Elena had stopped seeing Dominic as her enemy. And that terrified her. The mansion felt different after that. More dangerous. More tense. Dominic increased security around Elena. More guards appeared near her room. Cameras were installed in every hallway. Nobody entered or left the property without being checked. But fear still moved through the house like a shadow. Because Dominic knew Arthur would not stay quiet forever. If Arthur realized they knew the truth, he would strike first. One evening, Arthur arrived at the mansion unexpectedly. Dominic was away handling business downtown. Elena saw Arthur entering through the front hallway with 2 bodyguards behind him. He looked older than she imagined. Gray hair, expensive coat, calm smile, but his eyes were cold. Arthur acted like nothing was wrong. He asked about Dominic. He complimented the house. He smiled politely at Elena, but something about him felt wrong. Then Arthur noticed the silver bracelet on Elena's wrist. For the first time, his expression changed. Only for a second. But Elena saw it. Recognition. Arthur quickly looked away. That was all Elena needed. He knew exactly who she was. That night, Elena searched through Arthur's old records while the mansion slept. Inside one of the hidden drawers in Dominic's office, she found an old letter written by Frank Delaney years earlier. The letter was addressed to Arthur. It contained only one sentence. The Hart girl survived. Handle it before Dominic finds out. Elena's hand started shaking, because now she knew the truth. Arthur Moretti knew who she was from the beginning. He knew exactly why she came into Dominic's life. And if he knew she had found the truth, she would never leave the mansion alive. A loud sound behind her made her freeze. The office door slowly opened. Arthur Moretti stood in the doorway, holding a gun, and he was smiling. Dominic spent his entire life believing love was weakness until he realized Elena had become the only thing he could not lose. Elena froze the second she saw Arthur Moretti standing in the doorway with a gun in his hand. The office suddenly felt too small. Arthur remained calm. That was what made him frightening. He did not look angry. He did not look nervous. He looked like a man who had already decided how the night would end. The gun rested loosely in his hand as he stepped into the room and quietly closed the door behind him. Elena's heart pounded so hard she could barely think. Arthur glanced toward the letter on the desk. Then he looked back at her. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then Arthur slowly admitted the truth. He said Elena should have stopped searching a long time ago. He said her father made the same mistake years earlier. The same mistake Gabriel's father made too. Arthur had spent decades stealing money from the Moretti Empire, while Frank Delaney handled the violence. Anyone who discovered the truth disappeared. That included Elena's family. That included Gabriel's family. Arthur said Victor eventually found out, but by then it was too late. Victor chose to protect the family name instead of exposing his own brother. So the murders were buried. The records were hidden. And Dominic grew up surrounded by men who lied to him every day of his life. Elena stared at Arthur in disbelief, because for the first time, she understood how deep the betrayal truly went. Arthur was not just protecting himself. He was protecting an entire lifetime of lies. Then Arthur raised a gun. He said Dominic was too emotional when it came to Elena, too distracted, too weak. He said Dominic would destroy himself trying to protect her. That was when the office door burst open. Dominic stepped inside. The second he saw Arthur holding the gun toward Elena, something inside him broke. For years, Dominic followed rules. Never trust emotions. Never trust love. Never let people become weaknesses. But none of those rules mattered anymore, because Elena was standing in front of him, and Arthur was threatening to take her away. Dominic moved without hesitation. He slammed Arthur into the wall hard enough to send the gun across the room. The office exploded into chaos. Arthur fought back harder than Dominic expected. Even at his age, he was strong, desperate, and willing to do anything to survive. They crashed into the desk, shattered glass across the floor, and knocked over shelves filled with files. Elena grabbed the gun and stepped back. But before she could do anything, several armed men rushed into the room. Dominic recognized them instantly. They were his own guards, men he had trusted for years. But they were not there to protect him. Arthur had already turned them against him. One of the men pointed his weapon directly at Dominic. Arthur laughed at the blood running down his face. He said Dominic spent so much time chasing enemies outside the family that he never noticed the one standing beside him. Within minutes, the entire mansion fell apart. Half of Dominic's men remained loyal. The other half followed Arthur. Gunfire echoed through the hallways. Staff screamed. Guards turned on each other. The mansion became a war zone. Dominic grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her toward a private hallway hidden behind the library. For years, he had prepared escape routes in case enemies ever attacked his estate. He never imagined he would need them because of his own family. As they ran to the narrow hallway, Elena looked back and saw smoke rising through the house. The place that once felt cold and untouchable was falling apart behind them. Dominic led her downstairs into an underground garage hidden beneath the mansion. Several black SUVs waited near the far wall. Only 2 guards remained there, both loyal. For now, Dominic ordered them to prepare a car. Elena looked at him as he loaded weapons into the back seat with shaking hands. For the first time, Dominic looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. Everything he built was collapsing. His uncle betrayed him. His own men turned against him. The empire he spent his entire life protecting was beginning to break apart. And somehow, the only thing he cared about was making sure Elena stayed alive. That realization frightened him, because Dominic Moretti had always believed love destroyed people. Love made people weak. Love made them careless. And now he understood something even worse. He loved Elena. He loved her enough to lose everything. As the SUV sped away from the mansion, gunfire still echoed in the distance behind them. Elena sat beside Dominic in silence. Rain covered the windows. The city lights blurred around them. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Then Dominic finally looked at her. There was blood on his hands, a cut above his eye, exhaustion in his face, but his eyes remained locked on hers. He admitted that everything happening was his fault. He should have seen Arthur's betrayal sooner. He should have protected her from the beginning. He should have never allowed her to walk into his world. Elena looked away, because the truth was, she no longer knew how to feel. She came into Dominic's life to destroy him. She planned to use him, lie to him, expose him. But somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing him as the enemy. She saw the lonely boy named Gabriel hiding beneath Dominic Moretti, and now she was falling for him. That terrified her more than Arthur ever could, because revenge was simple. Love was not. The SUV finally stopped at an old safe house outside the city. The building looked abandoned from the outside, but Dominic had used it for years during emergencies. Inside, there were weapons, food, security cameras, and enough supplies to disappear for weeks. Dominic told Elena they would stay there until he figured out who was still loyal. He trusted almost nobody now. Marcus Hale was one of the few exceptions. Dominic called him immediately, but Marcus did not answer. That worried him, because Marcus had never ignored his calls before. Hours passed. Outside, the rain continued. Inside the safe house, Elena sat near the fireplace wrapped in a blanket, while Dominic moved through the building checking locks and windows. The tension between them felt impossible to ignore. They were alone, trapped, and for the first time since their marriage began, there were no lies left between them. Late that night, Elena found Dominic sitting alone in the kitchen. He looked tired in a way she had never seen before. Not like a mafia boss. Not like a fear don. Just like a man who had lost too much. Elena sat across from him. For several seconds, they simply looked at each other. Then Dominic reached across the table and took her hand. The touch was soft, careful, as if he was afraid she might disappear. Elena felt her chest tighten, because in that moment, she realized Dominic was no longer protecting her because of guilt. He was protecting her because he loved her, and she loved him too. That was when the lights inside the safe house suddenly went out. Dominic stood instantly. His face changed. The security monitors near the wall went black one by one. Then came the sound of tires outside. Multiple vehicles. Too many. Dominic grabbed his gun and rushed toward the window. Black SUVs surrounded the safe house from every side. Men stepped out carrying weapons. Arthur had found them. Dominic grabbed Elena's hand again and pulled her toward the back exit. Gunfire exploded through the walls before they could reach the door. Dominic and Elena were being ambushed. Dominic must choose between saving his criminal empire or saving the woman who came into his life to destroy him. Gunfire ripped through the walls of the safe house before Dominic and Elena could reach the back door. Glass exploded across the floor, which splintered around them. Elena dropped behind the kitchen counter as bullets tore through the cabinets above her head. Dominic grabbed one of the rifles hidden near the wall and fired back through the broken window without hesitation. Outside, at least 6 black SUVs surrounded the building. Arthur Moretti had not come alone. Men in dark coats moved through the trees and across the yard with military precision. They knew the layout of the safe house. They knew where the cameras were. They knew exactly how Dominic operated. That was what made it so dangerous. Arthur was not just attacking Dominic. He was using Dominic's own empire against him. Dominic fired again, hitting one of the men near the front gate. Another body dropped near the driveway, but more kept coming. Elena stayed low beside the counter, her breathing uneven. She had spent years imagining Dominic as a villain in her story. Now she was watching him risk his life to protect her. Every time bullets came too close, Dominic moved in front of her, without thinking. Every time she tried to stand, he forced her back down to safety. He was not protecting his empire. He was protecting her. That truth hit Elena harder than the gunfire around them. Dominic looked toward the hallway. There was still one way out. A hidden tunnel beneath the safe house connected to an abandoned train station several hundred yards away. He grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her toward the basement stairs. They barely made it halfway down before another explosion shook the house above them. Dust rained from the ceiling. The walls trembled. Arthur's men were blowing their way inside. Dominic shoved open the steel door at the bottom of the stairs and let Elena into the tunnel. The narrow passage was dark, damp, and barely wide enough for both of them to run side by side. Behind them, gunshots echoed to the basement. Arthur's men had already entered the house. Dominic kept moving. He held Elena's hand tightly, refusing to let go even once. For years, Dominic Moretti believed survival meant trusting nobody. Now the only thing keeping him moving was the woman running beside him. They reached the abandoned train station minutes later. Rain poured through the broken roof. Old tracks disappeared into darkness on both sides. Dominic led Elena toward an old black car hidden behind the station. Before they could reach it, headlights suddenly flooded the room. 3 black SUVs blocked the exit. Arthur stepped out slowly from the center vehicle. He looked calm despite the rain, as if he had already won. Several armed men stood behind him. Dominic immediately pulled Elena behind one of the concrete pillars. Arthur called out through the station. He said Dominic still had a chance to save himself. All he had to do was hand Elena over. Arthur promised the empire would remain his. The money, the businesses, the power, everything could go back to normal. Elena looked at Dominic. For one terrible second, she saw something in his eyes that frightened her. Not doubt, pain, because Arthur was offering him the one thing Dominic spent his entire life protecting, his empire. Everything his father built, everything men had died for. All Dominic had to do was let Elena go. Years ago, he would have done it without hesitation. Years ago, Dominic Moretti would have sacrificed anyone to survive. But that man no longer existed. Dominic looked toward Arthur. Then he stepped in front of Elena. He said there was no empire without loyalty, no power without trust. Arthur had destroyed both. Then Dominic raised his gun. The train station exploded into violence. Bullets shattered concrete pillars and metal beams. Glass rained from the broken windows. Men screamed through the smoke and darkness. Dominic fought like a man with nothing left to lose, because that was exactly what he had become. He moved through the station with terrifying focus, firing at every man who got too close to Elena. Several of Arthur's men fell, but Dominic was badly outnumbered. One bullet tore through his shoulder. Another cut across his side. Still, he kept moving. Still, he kept fighting. Elena stayed close behind him, terrified and helpless as the station turned into a battlefield. Then she saw something that made her blood run cold. Marcus Hale stepped out from behind one of the SUVs. Dominic froze for half a second. Marcus, the man he trusted more than anyone. The man who helped raise him after Victor died. The man who knew every secret inside the Moretti Empire. Marcus slowly lifted a gun. His face remained calm. That was when Dominic realized the truth. Marcus had been working with Arthur all along. For years, Marcus fed Arthur information, tracked Dominic's movements, and helped keep Frank Delaney hidden. The betrayal hit Dominic harder than the bullet wound in his shoulder, because Marcus was the last person he truly trusted. Arthur laughed as Dominic stared at Marcus. He said Dominic had always been too emotional, too blind, too weak when it came to the people he loved. Then Arthur made one final offer. He said Dominic could still save Elena. All he had to do was sign over every business, every account, every piece of the Moretti Empire. Arthur wanted everything. The casinos, the hotels, the shipping routes, the money. Dominic looked toward Elena. Rain ran down her face. Fear filled her eyes. But there was something else there, too. Love. For the first time, Elena realized Dominic was not the monster she spent years hunting. He was just a broken man trying to protect the only person who ever made him feel human again. Dominic slowly lowered his gun. Arthur smiled. Marcus stepped forward with a folder full of legal documents already prepared. Even now, Arthur expected Dominic to choose power. But Dominic was done fighting for power. He took the folder, signed every page, and handed over his empire without hesitation. Arthur looked almost disappointed, because in that moment, Dominic proved something Arthur never understood. There are some people worth losing everything for. Arthur ordered his men to take the papers. Then he told them to kill Dominic anyway. The second Arthur gave the order, Marcus turned his gun toward Elena. Dominic moved instantly. He shoved Elena to the ground just as Marcus fired. The bullet missed her by inches. Dominic tackled Marcus into the side of one of the SUVs. The gun slid across the wet pavement. Arthur's men opened fire again. Chaos exploded through the train station. Elena crawled behind one of the concrete pillars, struggling to breathe. She watched Dominic fighting Marcus in the middle of the rain. Years of loyalty, betrayal, and hatred crashed together in one violent moment. Marcus pulled a knife. Dominic slammed him against the side of the SUV hard enough to break the window. Then Dominic ripped the knife away and drove it into Marcus's chest. Marcus collapsed into the rain. Arthur saw it happen. For the first time, real fear appeared on his face. He stepped backward toward the waiting SUV. He was preparing to run. Dominic saw it too, ignoring the blood running down his shoulder. Dominic grabbed his gun and moved toward Arthur. Elena stood from behind the pillar. She screamed Dominic's name. Arthur turned suddenly. A gun appeared in his hand. Dominic ran toward Elena, and a gunshot echoed through the station. Years later, Elena discovers Dominic still kept one secret from her: the truth about who she really is. The gunshot echoed through the abandoned train station. For one terrible second, everything stopped. Rain continued falling through the broken roof. Smoke drifted through the air. Then Arthur Moretti collapsed to the ground. Blood spread across his chest as the gun slipped from his hand. Dominic had fired first. Arthur stared up at him in shock. For most of his life, Arthur believed Dominic would always hesitate when family was involved. He believed Dominic would always choose loyalty over justice. He was wrong. Dominic stepped closer, his shoulder bleeding heavily, his face cold and unreadable. Arthur tried to speak, but the words never came. Years of betrayal, lies, and murder finally ended in the middle of that ruined train station. By the time Dominic's remaining loyal men arrived, Arthur Moretti was dead. The war inside the Moretti Empire ended that same night. The news spread quickly through Chicago, New York, and Las Vegas. Arthur was gone. Marcus was dead. Frank Delaney disappeared before Dominic's men could find him, but his network collapsed within days. The people who once feared Arthur immediately turned back to Dominic. But Dominic no longer cared about power. For years, he spent his life protecting an empire that nearly destroyed him. Now, there was only one thing he wanted to protect: Elena. The weeks after the train station felt strange. Dominic sold several businesses connected to the darker side of the family empire. He shut down operations that brought violence into his life. He stepped away from the parts of the organization that kept him trapped for years. Many people were shocked. Some believed he was becoming weak. Others believed he was finally becoming free. Dominic did not care what they thought, because for the first time since he was a child, he no longer wanted to live surrounded by fear. He wanted peace. And somehow, Elena had become the only person who made peace feel possible. At first, Elena struggled to trust the quiet. She spent too many years preparing for danger, too many years looking over her shoulder. Even after Arthur's death, she still woke up some nights expecting gunshots, broken glass, and blood. But Dominic stayed beside her through all of it. He stayed when she could not sleep. He stayed when she had nightmares about her parents. He stayed when she broke down crying for reasons she could not explain, because Dominic understood pain in a way nobody else ever could. Months later, they left Chicago and moved into a large estate near the coast in Northern California. The house overlooked the ocean. There were no armed guards outside every room, no endless business meetings, no hidden weapons inside the walls. For the first time, the house felt like a home. Dominic and Elena slowly learned how to exist together, without fear standing between them. They ate breakfast in silence without suspicion. They walked along the beach at night, without bodyguards following them. They learned how to laugh again. And over time, the marriage that started as a lie slowly became real. 3 years later, Dominic and Elena were still together. Older, calmer, but still carrying the scars of everything they survived. Dominic had changed more than anyone expected. The man who once ruled through fear now spent most of his time restoring old buildings, investing in legal businesses, and staying as far away from organized crime as possible. People still feared his name. They always would. But Elena saw something different. She saw Gabriel Vale, the lonely boy who survived. One rainy afternoon, Elena entered Dominic's private office looking for an old insurance document. The room was quiet except for the sound of rain against the windows. Most of the old mafia records were gone now. Dominic burned many of them years earlier. He wanted to erase as much of that life as possible. But one locked drawer near the back of the desk remained untouched. Elena noticed a key sitting beside it. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she opened the drawer. Inside were several old files, faded photographs, and newspaper articles. At first, nothing looked unusual. Then she found a thin folder with her name written across the front. Elena froze. Slowly, she opened it. Inside were papers Dominic had kept hidden from her for years. Old birth records, hospital documents, photographs, letters. As Elena turned the pages, her breathing slowed, because the story she believed about herself was wrong. Laura and Michael Hart were not her biological parents. They adopted her when she was only 3 years old. Her real parents died before she could remember them. The truth was buried inside the final page of the file, a birth certificate. Her eyes moved slowly across the paper. Then they stopped at the last name, Moretti. Elena stared at it in horror, because according to the records, her real name was not Elena Hart. It was Elena Moretti. She looked up just as Dominic entered the office. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Dominic saw the file in her hands and immediately knew what happened. He had hidden the truth because he never wanted Elena to feel trapped by the Moretti name. Years earlier, after Victor rescued Gabriel, he secretly rescued Elena too. Her biological father had been Victor's cousin, which meant Elena had always been connected to the Moretti family by blood. She was never an outsider. She was never a stranger. She was family from the very beginning. Elena could barely breathe. For years, she thought the Morettis destroyed her life. Now she realized she had been born into that world before she ever understood what it meant. Dominic stepped closer to her. He admitted that Victor hid the truth to protect her. He admitted he only learned about it after Arthur died. And he admitted he was afraid to tell her, because after everything they survived, he did not want Elena to feel like her entire life had been built on another lie. Tears filled Elena's eyes, not because she was angry, because she no longer knew who she was. Dominic gently took the file from her hands and placed it back inside the drawer. Then he looked at her the same way he did on the day he married her, not with fear, not with suspicion, with love. He told her that names did not matter. Blood did not matter. The only thing that mattered was the life they built together. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she rested her head against his chest and closed her eyes. Outside, the rain continued falling against the windows. Inside the office, the old file remained hidden inside the drawer. And on the final page of that file, beneath her real birth certificate, was one more document Elena never saw. A second adoption record, one that revealed her real last name was never Moretti at all.